Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the MMaP Gallery at the Arts and Culture Centre. It's the first in a day-long series of events by Good as a Concert. Hopefully they're all going to be as good as a concert. And we're starting the Saturday morning with a storytelling session. Three of the province's finest storytellers here next to me on the stage. My name is Jim Payne, by the way. And we're going to kind of do a round robin. It's all of the events today. We're really trying to get back in some ways to the old sort of folk festival workshop style of things, instead of doing kind of straight on concert pieces that we just share stories back and forth. Songs mean stories are told in a number of ways. So whatever way our guest tellers decide to do so, that's what we'll have. I'm just going to introduce the three people on the stage here and just tell you a little bit about them. Catherine Wright here next to me is a storyteller, multi-arts practitioner, and arts educator who divides her time between St. John's and Port Curwen. She enjoys sharing folk and fairy tales, ballads, personal narratives, and her own imaginative stories. Her background in dance is apparent in her storytelling style as well. She often includes songs, recitations, traditional or original, in her story sets. A versatile performer who brings warmth and passion to her storytelling, Catherine has presented at schools, festivals, theatres, galleries, outdoor venues, and online in her over 30 years of performance experience. Next to Catherine is Harry Ingram, born and raised in Arnold's Cove, in what Ray Guy called that far greater bay. We just call it Placentia Bay. People who aren't from Placentia Bay, I mean. Recitation has always been a core element of Harry's upbringing, which he now performs in various venues. He's a member of the popular From Stage to Stage group and has put pen to paper to capture some of his works in a book titled Don't Be Talking. You can find it out there actually on the table. Harry writes a lot of his own material, but he also enjoys keeping alive the works of greats such as Leo O'Brien, John Joe English, Baxter Wareham, and others. And finally, to my far left here, as a professional storyteller and workshop facilitator, Mary Farron has been performing at festivals and events since 1997. She tells a variety of folk and fairy tales for both adults and children. Much of her work centers around the traditional Newfoundland stories, with a particular focus on the Jack tales for adults. She's a co-founder of the St. John's Storytelling Festival, has worked with the award-winning radio documentary maker Chris Brooks on projects such as Annotated Jack and the Jack Cycle. Mary co-wrote and workshopped the Battle of World's End Water, the Bottle of World's End Water with Andy Jones, in collaboration with the St. John's Puppet Collective, and performed the show at the LSPU Hall. She also co-wrote and performed a game of cards with Eleanor Dawson, who will feature here at this festival today, which was performed at the Rooms. Through her work with the Newfoundland and Labrador Parent-Child Mother Goose program, she researched and collected traditional material and co-developed the book Over the Big Fat Waves, a collection of Newfoundland and Labrador rhymes, songs, and language games. So now that we've established all your credentials, we'll get started. And it's funny because we did a session yesterday morning, myself, Catherine, and Mary, for the Department of Education, but Catherine had set it up and she didn't get to actually tell any stories. So I've asked her this morning if she would go first to try to make up for that.
Very good. Well, good morning, everyone. It's so nice to be here and share the stage with you fine folk. I have some stories and also some ballad songs that I'm going to share during the morning, because of course story can be told in many ways, including through song, and that's very apparent, especially in Newfoundland. But I'm going to start with a story that comes out of the English tradition, and I have a lot of British ancestry. And of course, a lot of the stories that are told here in Newfoundland are out of that tradition, including a lot of the Jack tales. So this is a Jack tale of a different sort, and it's called Goburn Seer. And so it goes like this. There was once a man named Goburn Seer. Now you might think that's a bit of a strange name, but it was his name. And he had one son named Jack. Now they lived alone together in a little house. And one day, after the long winter was done, Goburn said to his son, he said, Jack, now, can you take this sheepskin and go into town and sell it for me? Only mind, you're to bring back the pay and also the skin. Now, Jack thought, that's a strange thing for me to have to do, but he wanted to please his father, so he took the sheepskin and away he went. Well, you can imagine, it's very hard to sell something, get paid for it, and take it home again, right? So he tried all day. He went around, but no success. At the end of the day, he comes home. Father, he said, I couldn't do it. Never mind now, Jack, he said, you can go again tomorrow and try your luck. So next day, same thing. Can't sell the sheepskin. He comes home at the end of the day. He says, Father, there's no use. Well, you go tomorrow. He said, maybe third time lucky. All right, says Jack. Very good. So the next day, he goes off with the sheepskin. And he's dejected right from the start because he knows it's a lost cause. It's going the same way. Finally, he comes to this bridge, and he stood up on the bridge, and he's thinking to himself, now, what am I going to do? If I go home, third day, still not sold, Dad is going to be so vexed with me. Maybe I should just run away, not go home. But, to run away for the sake of a sheepskin? He was perplexed. He was that disturbed. Now, down on the bank, just below the bridge, there was a woman. And she was washing her clothes in the river. And she looked up and she saw Jack. She's like, what's eating at him? So she called out. She said, hey, you there. If you don't mind me asking, I can tell something is bothering you. What is it? And so he told her the story. She said, well, sure, that's no problem. Hand me down that sheepskin now. And so he did. She put it in the water and she washed it and she scrubbed it nice and clean. She said, now, I'm going to take the wool, Jack. And she took all the wool off the skin and she paid him for the wool. And she said, now you take the skin and you take that back to your father. All is well. So that's what he done. He went back to his dad and he said, here you are, father. And he gave him the money and the skin. Well, Goban was so impressed. He was really happy. He said, now, how did you manage this? And he told him about the woman. He said, now, she's obviously a really wise woman, Jack. And she would make for you a very nice wife. Can you go and find her? Maybe ask her over for tea so I can meet her. So Jack went back down to the river, and sure enough, there she was, still scrubbing at her clothes. He said, so would you come back to the house and have a cup of tea? My father would like to meet you. She said, yes, I can do that. She said, but I'm pretty busy today. It'll have to be tomorrow. All right, very good, he said. So off he went, and, they straightened the house up a bit, and maybe they made a little something to go with the cup of tea the next day. Anyway, she came over, and they had a nice cup of tea together, and, well, they got along really well. And the father could see she was indeed an intelligent woman. And he said, now, will you marry my son, Jack? And she said, yes, I will do that. And so they were married. Now, a little time went by, and the ground thawed out enough, and it happened that Goban, his main profession, he was an architect, and he was known in the lands. And he was asked to come to one of the towns not too far away. The king wanted to build a magnificent palace, a palace so wonderful, beyond all beauty, and it would show his power and might over all other kings in all the lands. So on the day that they were to go and start construction and put down that cornerstone, Goban had Jack with him, and they started off. Well, it was a long walk, and they hadn't gone more than a few steps when Goban said to Jack, now, Jack, he said, can you shorten the journey for me? Well, Jack looks at his father, shorten the journey, Dad? Yeah, he said, shorten the journey for me. Now, it's a long walk. I can't do that, says Jack. Sure, what am I supposed to do? Take out a piece of the road? You know I can't do that. Well, says his father, then you're foolish, and you may as well go on home out of it. And so that's what he done. He went back home. Well, he came in, and there's his wife. And you know what? The story doesn't have a name for his wife, and that's wrong in my mind. So let's call her Nancy. He comes in, and he says, Nancy, he sent me home. Why? She said, well, I couldn't shorten the journey for him. Jack, you're foolish, sir, she says. All you have to do is tell him a tale, and that'll shorten his journey. So here, I'm going to give you a story, and you're going to go and catch up to him, and you're going to tell him that story, and it'll shorten the journey. And so that's what happened. He ran on, he caught up, and at first his father would hardly even look at him, but he starts on his story, and sure enough, it shortens the journey, and they're there. Now, it takes a long time to build a beautiful, huge palace. And Nancy had told them, now, when you're there, you make sure you mind your manners and you're nice to everybody, no matter what their station, low or high. And so they were well liked. They would always say good day, no matter if it was a servant or construction worker or the king. And time went on, and finally the palace was almost complete. The king came to inspect, and a big audience came around and stood to look up at this gigantic, magnificent structure. Now, King, said Gobbern, there's just one ceiling that I got to complete, but I'll have that done for you tomorrow. Very good, said the king. I'll come back tomorrow and I'll pay you and you can go on your way. Now that night, the housekeeper came to Gobbern and Jack, and she said, now, you're nice fellows, and I want you to know there is a plan afoot for your demise. She said, that king, he's not going to pay you. No, he's not even going to let you go. He is going to kill the two of you because you are known as the architect for this amazing structure, and he does not want you taking your art anywhere else. He doesn't want anyone else to have such a fine palace as this one. Well, Jack was in a tizzy, but his father said, now, Jack, it'll all be fine. The next morning, when the king came to pay him, he said, now, I'm sorry, I couldn't finish the ceiling because I realized there is a special tool that I need, and it's back at home. So I'm going to send Jack back to the house and get the tool for me. Oh, no, said the king. You can send one of the servants for that. No. I can't send a servant because it has to be someone who can speak well and is going to know what to ask for. Well then, said the king, I tell you what, you can send my son instead. And so he called the prince, and Gobbern wrote a little note to his wife and handed it to the prince, and off he went. Now, it took a while for him to get there, but I suppose he probably had a nice horse to ride on, right? So it was a bit quicker. And when he got there, he knocked on the door, and in he went, and there was Nancy. And he handed her the note from Gobbern, and she looked at the note, and it said, get me crooked and straight. Huh, all right, she says. Well, now, she says to the prince, I got to get me down that big trunk that's up there on that high shelf because that's where his tool is. And she's reaching up. She said, I can't reach it. You're big and tall and strong. You get it down for me. So he got down the big trunk and he lays it down on the ground and opens it up for her. And she said, now, there should be a special tool right down the bottom. Can you get it out for me? And he leans in to have a look. And no sooner had he leaned in than she grabs his two legs and stuffs them down and slams down the top of the trunk. And there he is inside, all crooked and straight. Well, she got a drill and she put some holes in the thing. She didn't want to suffocate, She wasn't that cruel. She said, no, don't take this personal. It's not that I don't like you or anything, but, And then she got a little piece of paper and a pen and she poked it down through the air hole and she said, now you write a little note to your father. And that's what he did. By the time the note got to his father, of course, they were all waiting, wondering what was going on. And the king read the note, and he said, oh my. Because basically, he realized the only way he was getting back his son was to let Gobbern and Jack go home out of it safe and sound and paid well, too. And so that's what happened. He sent back Gobbern and Jack, and when they came in, they let the prince go. And now Gobbern looked at Jack and he said, you know what, Jack? I think we do need to build another palace. He said, we need to build a palace more beautiful even than that one we just made. And we need to make it for your wise wife, Nancy. But she said, don't be foolish. She said, what do I need kicking around in a big old palace? Just build me a nice house with a view over the bay, paint it yellow, and I won't be tripping over the likes of you. And that's the end of the story.
Yeah, great.
And how does one follow that? I don't know. Great imagery, great pictures painted in that. That's lovely, wonderful. I'll try to paint a couple of pictures for you myself here now. Let's see. I'll start with most all my stories are in rhyme, recitation form. So the first one I'll do is a story of maybe it's the oddest case of moose hunting you ever heard tell of in your life. I know Catherine's a fan of this
one.
Yeah. It's called Jerome. Now, old Skipper Bill hove off in his chair. He was listening to the stories and lies. The young fellas talked about poaching moose and jigging a few fish on the sly. Well, each story told was more far-fetched than the one that came just before. Skipper Bill had enough. Said, listen now, boys, I got a fine tale in store. It was the early 70s. Or was it my early 70s? I really can't remember that far. When I took my boat, went out on the pond, I figured I'd stay till dark. My old bamboo pole and my tub of worms, I ventured a good ways offshore. It was just a small flat with no motor at all, just the tow pins and the gunnels and oars. Well, a half dozen trout was all that I caught. I really could not have cared less. With the water so calm and the sun on my face, I figured it a good time to rest. It's the sound of the birds and the crisp morning air and the gentle wind rustling the trees. And a full day ahead to finish my catch, I decided to drift off to sleep. Then all of a sudden, a shotgun blast sure nearly jumped out of my skin. And another one followed right after, and a voice yelling, shooting again! Then out of the woods, like the shot of a gun, came a moose looking around for protection. When he looked all around, he looked up, he looked down like a CFA, looking for directions. Now the thought crossed my mind to grab the oars and head to the other side, but when I looked around, I soon realised they were carried away with the tide. Then the moose left the shore and swam out to me, and here I had nowhere to go. And what his intentions were with me, I didn't really want to know. But it wasn't what you'd think, though, at all, as I stared in the face of this moose. He seemed to say, buddy, I need some help. I said, yes, buddy, me too. So then with his rack, he took the painter in tow and he dragged me safe to the shore. I said, now, boy, you just saved my skin, so I guess it's now time I save yours. See, I knew a shortcut back to the truck, and the moose followed close behind. When we got there, I motioned to the pan of the truck, and pretty soon in it he climbed. Led down flat like he was dead, sprawled off in the pan of me truck, passing by hunters with their guns in their vests, quite jealous of my fortune and luck. Well, back to my home we arrived soon enough and pulled round the back of the house. As soon as he seen that we were alone, he quickly hopped up and got out. Well, that was a close one, this moose said to me. That's right before I passed out. Then coming to realise it wasn't a dream, sure I was gone for another bout. I finally woke up and came to grips and started to regain my composure. I thanked him and said, now be on your way. He said, not until moose season's over. Now, to argue with a beast of this monstrous size, I didn't even bother to try. I just cleared a spot in the back of the shed, said that should do for the night. But what a commotion at 2:45 that brought me right to my feet. I went downstairs and looked out of the deck at this moose covered up in the sheet. Now, not just the sheet he had wrapped round his head and tangled all up in his points. It was the clothesline and all with wool socks, pants and bras all snarled up with patio lights. Well, he lowered his head and he apologised to me. He said, you mind if I came in the house? It was awful lonely out there in the shed. I promise I'll be quiet as a mouse. Well, I let him squeeze in. Perhaps a stunned thing to do. It was a good thing we got double doors. He wasn't in more than a second and a half before he sprawled off on the hardwood floor. He looked a bit like Bambi on steroids. You know, the way Bambi sprawled off on the ice. Well, we finally got him up on the daybed, with the daybed now nowhere in sight. Well, next morning he was hungry. Sure, I didn't know what to give him to eat. He didn't like bottles of sweet mustard pickles, and he didn't like bottles of meat. Moose are vegetarian, you see, so bottles of meat were no use. I couldn't give him bottled rabbit or tern, well, heaven forbid bottled moose. Then with his hoof, he pointed out to the backyard. He said, I got a deal for you, Skipper. You won't have them all for as long as I'm here. Just don't try to feed me them flippers. So with his diet sorted and lodging somewhat, for work I tried not to be late. Around break time I stopped to check the news. There's a moose down Kitty Vitty Lake. Well, it wasn't long before he arrived on the scene with the wildlife officer there too. I said, come on now, buddy, he's just trying to get a drink. It's not like he's in the McDonald's drive-thru. Then after a while, we started agreeing and we figured out what would be best. He's no longer allowed to go parading around town without a huge orange vest. So, there you have it. He stayed for a while and everything worked out just fine. He ate the grass in our backyard and used his antlers for the clothesline. He went back into the woods when the hunters came out, but don't think it all ends there. He became a good friend to the family, and sure, he comes back every year. Now, the boys couldn't believe it at all. Sure, that Bill was on the juice. Sure, there's no way in the world that this could be true. I mean, really? A talking moose? Well, Bill just smiled and he looked at his watch. He said, I think it's now time I head home. For the last 10 minutes, my ride's been outside. 'Tis a big bull moose named Jerome.
This is like a Newfoundland version of Mr. Ed or something, isn't it? I'll pass it over to Mary now. And by the way, I'll say, like, you know, if any of you want to engage any of the storytellers, you have a question about their stories or anything you'd like to say, feel free. We'd like to keep it as informal as possible. Mary,
Great.
take it away.
So, as was said at the beginning, I love to tell a Jack story, and so when I was invited to this event, it was an opportunity to share, and yesterday we had a lot of fun sharing stories as well. So I'm going to tell a story, actually, that I heard Dale Jarvis tell a number of years ago, and I thought, he said it was from an Eastern European story, and I said, that's a Jack story that's got to be told in Newfoundland. It's such a great story. So I've adjusted this story to kind of suit the environment, and I hope you enjoy it. And it's called Jack and the Little Man Under the Stove, and it goes like this. Once upon a time, not in my time or in your time, but a time before, when extraordinary things happened, there was a couple. And they had a baby, a beautiful, bouncing baby boy, and they named him Jack. Now, Jack was a great little fella, and he grew up, and after a while he said to his parents, roast me a hen and bake me a bun, for it's time for me to go off and seek my fortune. And so that's what they did. Jack packed up his bun and his hen, and they gave him his blessing, and off Jack went. And he walked, and he walked, and he walked. And he walked for a long time, but he couldn't find any work. And poor old Jack, he was tired, and he was hungry. But what could he do? So he kept on walking. And he walked for a year and a day. And I can tell you that lots of things happened during that year and a day, but we don't have time for those stories today. He met giants and kings and maybe built a castle for one of the kings. But in this one, he finally gets to this place. He's standing on the top of the hill, and a year and a day has passed. And he looks off in the distance, and he sees a light. And so Jack makes his way towards the light. And as he gets closer, he realizes it's a house. And so he makes his way through the gates up to the great door, and he knocks. And out comes a man. Creak opens the door. What would you like? Says the man. And Jack says, well, I'm looking for some work. Have you got any work? And the man says, can you cook? Jack says, yes, I'm a grand hand for cooking. He says, well, come on in and you can work for me. So Jack goes in and he gets set up in the kitchen, and he loves working at this place. And in the kitchen is this beautiful old stove. And it's a black enamel with silver chrome all the way around. It's got a beautiful bread warmer at the top, and it's up about this high off the floor. And Jack loves working on this stove, and he cleans it really well every day, and time passes. Now one day, Jack's in there, and he's making a delicious rabbit stew. He gets all the vegetables laid up and cleaned and cut, lays them down, puts the rabbits in. He makes a beautiful butter pastry, puts that on top, gets it in the oven. And the smell of that starts to fill the house. And just around the time when it's done, up jumps from underneath the stove a little wee man. And he looks at Jack. And Jack looks at the little wee man and he says, what can I do for you? And he says, Jack, now, you wouldn't spare a bit of that rabbit stew you got there in the oven, would you? And Jack took the pie out and he laid it up on the top of the stove. And the little wee man, Jack looked at the little wee man, he looked at the pie and he said, sure, you can have a little taste, he said. So the little wee man hops up on the edge of the pan, cracks open the pastry and starts to eat. And he eats and he eats and he eats and he eats. Soon the whole pie is gone. Jack looks at the little wee man, looks at the pie, it's all gone. The little wee man thanks Jack, pops back down under the stove. And that is that. And just at that moment, the master of the house comes in and looks for Jack. And he said, my God, Jack, that rabbit stew smells some good. Can you share a bit with me now? And Jack looked in the pan. He said, I'm sorry. And he told the master of the house what had happened. And the master of the house says, well, that's all right, Jack. What can you do? And so Jack made him a great big slab of homemade bread with butter and sugar spread on top. And the master of the house was pretty pleased and he went off. Now, the next day, Jack got up and he got into the kitchen and he started making a moose stew. And he got all the vegetables and the moose, and he got a nice gravy made, and he got the pot going on the top of the stove, and he was mixing it up, and it was smelling delicious. When who should pop up from underneath the stove but the little wee man? And this time he's holding a little wee bowl. And he says to Jack, Jack, could you spare a little of your stew for me with my bowl, because my wife is sick? Jack looked at the little wee man and looked at the little wee bowl and thought, well, how much could possibly fit in that little wee bowl? And the poor man's wife is sick. So he agrees. And the little wee man hops up on the side of the pot and he takes a spoon, he starts filling the bowl, filling the bowl, filling the bowl, filling the bowl. And soon the whole pot of stew is gone. And the little wee man hops down off the pot and gets back under the stove. And Jack's standing there. And he has to go tell his master what had happened. And so Jack goes in and he tells the man what had happened, and the man says to Jack, now Jack, that's enough of that, he said. Next time that little wee man comes, you take that plank over there in the corner of the room, and I want you to knock that little wee man right over the head, and that'll be that. Jack says, okay, fine, I suppose. So next day, Jack gets up and he makes a drop of fish stew. He gets the codfish all laid out and gets the potatoes and a few herbs from the kitchen garden, and he gets it all going in the pan. And you can imagine the smell coming off that stew was delicious. And the little wee man pops up from underneath the stove. And the little wee man got a tear in his eye. And he says, Jack, could you spare a little cup of that stew for me? He said, my wife's after dying and I got a small youngster. Well, what could Jack do? He looked over at the plank and he looked over at the little wee man. He said, how much could he possibly fill in that little wee cup? And sure, it's only for a child. So he said, sure. So the little wee man hops up on the stove, and I don't need to tell you what happened, but he filled that cup up, and soon the pot was gone. Jack was a little bit worried now, and just at that moment, in came the master. Jack, have you got any fish stew for me? No, said Jack. What happened? He told him about the little wee man and the tear in his eye, and the master said, I'm sorry, Jack, you're fired. Jack said, what? He said, yes, but I told you if you didn't take the plank and knock that little wee man over the head, I was going to have to fire, and that's what I'm going to do. But he said, it's a dark and stormy night tonight, Jack, so you can stay one more night in my house. So Jack said, great. So Jack went off to bed. The master called in the other servant of the house, and he said, now make me a stew. And if that little wee man comes up, he said, take that plank and knock him right over the head. Yes, said the servant. So the servant got cooking the stew, and soon the smell of the stew was filling the house, and up came the little wee man. And the servant just took the plank. He never thought one thing about it, and knocked the little wee man right over the head. And the little wee man curled up in a ball, rolled back under the stove, holding his head. Poor little fella. Anyway, the next morning, Jack got up and he went into the kitchen and he was looking around trying to gather an old crust of bread or something to take with him on the road. And while he was there, up came the little wee man from underneath the stove. And he said to Jack, now, Jack, he said, you're after helping me out a lot, he said. You were very kind to me, he said, and one good deed deserves another. And he took Jack by the hand, and just like that, Jack and the little wee man were under the stove and standing in this great hall. Jack looked around, and down at the end of the hall was a door. And the little wee man and Jack made their way towards the door, and when the door opened up, it was a beautiful crystal room. Jack had never seen anything like it before in his life. And at the far end of the room was a little table. And the little wee man took Jack's hand and he walked him down to the table. And on the table was a small box, and it was engraved, beautiful little box. And he said, "Now, Jack," he said, "you take this box, and all you have to do is wish for anything you can imagine in your mind," he said, "and then you tap the box 3 times, and you'll get what your wish is." So Jack said, "Great." And he said, "Now try it out now, Jack, before you go. Make sure it works." "Yes," said Jack. So Jack thought for a minute. He tapped the box 3 times, and just like that, there was Jack standing in the finest suit of clothes made from wool woven by some little fairies down below. Anyway, Jack was pleased with himself, and he had a beautiful sack of food ready to take on the road with him. Jack thanked the little man, and the little man thanked Jack, and he took Jack by the hand, and they went out of the room and up to the place, and just like that, Jack was back in the kitchen. And the servant came in to make breakfast for the master of the house. And he said, "Now, Jack," he said, "where'd you get them clothes to? And that big sack of food?" And Jack told the story. And the servant went right to the master of the house and told him what had happened to Jack. And Jack said, so the master said, "Well, you get Jack now, you get him to come right here and tell me that story." So the servant went chasing after Jack and brought him into the master. And the master made Jack tell that story 3 times, all the details. And Jack told the story. And the master said, "Well, go on with you now, Jack," he said. So Jack took his box and he went off down the road in his fine suit of clothes with his bag of food over his shoulder. And then the master said to the servant, "Now you get in there, make some dinner." He said, "When that little wee man comes up, you get him to eat some and you tell him. Just do as Jack did." So the servant went into the kitchen and he started cooking a beautiful pot of stew. And after a while, the little wee man came up and he was still rubbing his head a little bit nervous. And the servant said to him, "The little wee man, now would you like some stew?" "No," said the little wee man, "I don't think I'll have any more stew." "No, come on now, this is really good," he said. "You just have a little taste." And he took the spoon, he put it right up next to the little wee man. The little wee man took a little taste. "Yeah, that's good," he said. And he said, "Well, now, one good deed deserves another." "Well, I wants my little box," said the servant. So the little wee man said, "Okay, bye, come with me." And just like that, the 2 of them are down under the stove. They're walking along the hall. They're in the crystal room, just like Jack said. There's the box on the end of the table. The little wee man says to the servant, "Now, you take this," he said. "You bring this to your master and you'll get just what you deserve." So he takes the little box and just like that, the servant's back in the kitchen. He runs to the master and he says, "Here, I got this box," he said. And the master says, "Okay, we'll tap it 3 times and wish for something." So they tap it 3 times, but up come 2 little wee men with great big clubs, and they knock the 2 of them right over the head. And then they disappear. And that was that. As for Jack, well, he went off down the road and along until he came to this beautiful place down the southern shore. And it was nice up on a hill, and he looked out over and he said, "Yes, this is a good place to have a house," he said. And he thought about the house that he wanted. Maybe it was yellow. It wasn't too grand, but he tapped the box 3 times, and just like that, there was a beautiful house before Jack. And he opened up a restaurant in there. And so people used to come and share stories like we're doing here today. And so one time I was driving down the shore and I saw Jack's place, and I thought, I'm going in there now for a bite to eat. And I went in and Jack was there and he told me that story. And he said, "Now you tell that story next time he goes to a storytelling festival," he said. And he said, "Make sure you tell the crowd that hears it that they should start telling that story too, because that's a good story and it's worth telling." And that's the story of Jack.
That's great. Harry, you got another one first. I'm going to go probably to Harry a bit more because his pieces are generally shorter than what the rest of us are doing. So
Yes.
Harry, you bring us back to Catherine again.
Yes, best going, yeah. My only concern, a great story, but my only concern is that moose, I hope that wasn't drawn. That's,
I hope so too.
that's my only concern, everything else is fantastic. I also, I like to do, as in my bio there's, I like to tell stories that other people have told before us. I really enjoy and respect that so much, because without them telling these stories, we wouldn't be telling our stories. So I like to do that as well. So my high school teacher in Arnold's Cove was Baxter Wareham. Baxter was very, very strict at school. He wore a cowboy boots. You hear him clunking down the hall. Everybody was quiet and in their seat, no doubt about it. One time I was outside. I was invited to a party, and Baxter was playing. He had his accordion out, and I said, "Hey, Mr. Wareham, how you doing?" And he said, "Harry, we're not at school now. I'm Baxter." I said, "Oh, best going. Hi, Baxter. Best going." Lovely. Next Monday morning, we're in school, and I said, "Hey, Baxter," and he just looked at me. And I said, "Mr. Wareham, better." And walked on. Okay. So I got the division there, all good. Anyway, Baxter, when we were 14, 15 years old, I suppose, we were, that's me and a few of my friends, we used to listen to a lot of Baxter's works and sing along, maybe with the aid of a few beverages. But yeah, it was a lot of fun, and we actually learned one of his recitations and used to say it in unison. There's 4 or 5 of us used to stand up and do this. That's when everybody turn around and leave, but that's all good. It was just fun for us. But anyway, this particular one, I hadn't done it much on stage. It's just from my memory side. This is a bit of a special occasion today, and I wanted to do it. I've done it a couple of times, I think, since, but bear with me, and I'm going to try to get it all. It's called The Yankee Privateer. Well, it was in the year 1793. The Yankee privateers was raiding the coast of Newfoundland, robbing the Newfoundlanders of their codfish, which was their only means of livelihood. And as the saying used to go then, they used to use Newfoundlanders' heads for cannonballs. Now, William Kelly, he be the principal man there was there in our place at that time, he called a meeting in his fish store to see what could be done, because the population was on the hands of starving. Well, he made a thundered-and-fired speech, and he offered his old hooker up to any 6 men that'd take her and go up to St. John's and bring down a load of provisions. Well, up speaks one, "I'll go." And you said another, "I'll go, I'll go, I'll go." And I said, "Look at here now, boys, you can't all go." So we picked out 6 of the strappingest young men there was in Salmon Air at that time, and me being youngest of them all, they selected me for skipper. We then fitted up William Kelly's old hooker for that trip up to St. John's. We arrived at St. John's and tied up at Bain Johns's wharf okay. We then loaded pork, beef, molasses and flour, and likewise sir, a punch and a rum that we placed on the quarter. Now, owing to the wind being ahead, we never put her out, but next day, the wind being fair, we let her go. Well, we had a thundering fine time going down along the shore. The Derby Doolan, who appeared as lookout on the foredeck, well, he said he spied a sail which appeared to be a bark about 100 tons or more. And as he bore down on us, we thought he wanted to speak to us. And seeing as he was flying the Custom House flag, we didn't think it any harm. But when he rounded our quarter, down went the Custom House flag from his main top, and up went the stars and stripes to his main peak. Well, tarnation Moses. "Well, don't say Doyle you're dead, boy," said I. "Maybe they're like the devil now, not half so bad as they're painted. But anyhow, we'll hope for the best and prepare for the worst." "A hooker ahoy," says he. "Well, hi to yourself, sir," said I. "Where are you from?" said he. "St. Pierre," said I, with a load of salt, thinking I might outwit him. But him being up to all sorts of tricks, he knew 'twas a pack of lies. "Surrender," said he. "To who?" said I. "To the Republic of the United States," said he. "And I'll be damned if I do," says I. "You'll be damned if you don't," says he. And jumping into my boat, he said, "Let 10 of my men jump in here with me." And it wasn't long before there was a bayonet pointed at each of our breasts. "Now will you surrender?" said he. "To your honour I will," said I. And it wasn't long before we was bound hand and foot and placed in the cabin of that Yankee privateer. They then hauled our old hooker up alongside, and they unloaded the pork, beef, molasses and flour. "What's the puncheon?" said he. "Rum," said one of the crew. "I'll fetch it along this way," says he. Then "Hush, hush," says Mark the Derby Doolan, and he hung his 2 daddlers right over his head. I said, hush, hush now, Mark, my darling fella, and you keep your hands behind your back in case someone comes. Later on, you might get a chance to free us all. Just then the captain's head appeared in the companionway. How yet now, me landlubber, said he. Fine, sir, said I. You'll be no great spell that waiting, says he. That's as much as you knows about it, sir, said I. He said, we're going to scuttle your old hooker now. Thank you kindly, sir, said I. And it wasn't long before we heard him chop and chop and chop, and that gurgling sound told us our old hooker was gone to the bottom. Why, we almost give up to despair. But peeking on deck about a quarter of an hour later, we heard one hell of a ruckus up forward. And there he was, me son, bailed the rum into him. Yes, me son, bailing into him. And I said, hold on now, boys, for an hour or so. So rushing on deck about 3/4 of an hour later, each man seized an iron blame pin, and it wasn't long before we had them Yankees bound hand and foot, and they'd been too full of liquor to show much fight. We placed some in her cabin, some more in her forecastle, and to their surprise, a man at each companionway with a loaded musket that we found among the ship's stores. Now, we never had much trouble with them Yankees going down along the shores. They'd been too securely bound. Now, on to the cab out there off of Petty Harbour, we never got to St. John's before the next day. And 'twas there we gave our prize over to a British man of war. And the captain, been mighty pleased with us, gave us £450 to be shared among the ship's crew, and fitted us up with a new hooker, and gave us new provisions, and started us all off for home again, because there they had us all give up for lost. And sure wouldn't we nearly, when we was captured and bound hand and foot and placed in the cabin of that Yankee privateer. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go for it.
All right, so I'm going to sing a song just to change things up a little bit. And following on the nautical kind of themes, I'm actually going to sing one that I wrote. So it's new, but it's in an old tradition, because I grew up really enjoying folk songs and ballads, listening to them a lot here. One's from Newfoundland, but also from Britain. And at home I have the Peacock collection, which some of you may be aware of. It's like a 3-volume collection of folk songs. There's a lot of really great stuff in there.
It's actually out there on the table.
Oh, is it out
as
there
a CD-ROM? Yeah.
Okay, it's really, I recommend it highly. Anyway, this is a story that is from my own ancestry, and I've been working, some of you know, for a while on a project that's about a shipwreck in my family. And my great-great-grandfather was a ship's captain. And so this song is from his point of view. His name was David Wright. And the ship sank in the month of March. So it seems very fitting with our kind of Rites of Spring theme. Because usually it sank off the coast of Cornwall, England. It was a merchant ship coming from Calcutta, India. They'd almost made it all the way home to England. And usually that part of the world, it's very much spring at this time of year. There'd be daffodils growing and sheep in the field and cattle, and everything would be lush and green, and the hedgerows would be profuse with flowers and birdsong. But on this particular occasion, a really bad blizzard swept in to the English Channel, and there were people perished in a number of shipwrecks along the coast, and there were also livestock that died standing in the fields. So it was a huge tragedy. It affected a lot of people in that area, and my ancestors were caught up in it. So both my great-great-grandfather, who was the captain of the ship, as well as his wife, who was the only woman on board, which I find interesting, both died in this shipwreck. So anyway, my father was a tailor, that's not the trade for me, for now I am a sailor, a captain on the sea. My father sewed trousers, and I can mend a sail. He thread a needle through an eyelet while I navigate a gale. Hoist the sails, set the compass for home. I'm weary from my travels, take me back across the foam. I married a woman by the plain name of Jane. She's mother to 5 fine sons, and I'd do it all again. I had a little daughter, was the apple of my eye. And when I think about her, well, I break down and cry. Hoist the sails, set the compass for home. I'm weary from my travels, take me back across the foam. A sailor prays for gentle waves to carry him over the sea. When day dawns bright or on moonlit night, there's no better place to be. I've rescued German sailors, I'm proud, it must be told. And for my valiant efforts, a chronometer made of gold. Hoist the sails, set the compass for home. I'm weary from my travels, take me back across the foam. I command a merchant vessel, 4 square sails and steel hull. She floats like a feather, she flies like a gull. She was built in Belfast, the swiftest on the sea, with a load of jute aboard her from Calcutta to Dundee. Hoist the sails, set the compass for home. I'm weary from my travels, take me back across the foam. I've steered through all weather, never thought I'd die at sea. Now a raging storm engulfs us, the worst in memory. If I could have one final wish, I'd see my wife to shore. Her smiling face, her arms spread out to the family I adore. Hoist the sails, set the compass for home. I'm weary from my travels, take me back across the foam. Hoist the sails, set the compass for home. I'm weary from my travels, take me back across the foam.
Yeah, what a gorgeous song. That's great. And actually it gives me an excuse to remind you that this afternoon session is a song session. So I hope you'll come back for that. And I think one of the features of the afternoon session is also going to be a kind of an open floor, after some of the guest singers have had to go around a couple of times for anybody in the audience who wants to share a song. I think maybe before I go back to Mary, I'll interject this little story here. Actually, it's more than a little story, really. There's a lot to unpack in this story. It goes on for a while. But it's when I was growing up on the western side of Notre Dame Bay, a friend of my father's named Joe Windsor used to be around the house a lot. And if my father was home, especially on a Saturday night, there was always a time going on in the house. And Joe was often around. He played the accordion, he was a great singer, but he also had a lot of stories that he always used to tell about the central figure was his great uncle, a fellow by the name of Bill Tom Windsor. And I could never, after a while, you were never really sure if the stories that he told were really about Bill Tom or if he was just using Bill Tom as a hook to hang the story on. Because it seemed like whatever the story was, Bill Tom was involved. But this one is Bill Tom and the Fish. And there's sort of 2 or 3 stories about Bill Tom kind of wrapped up in this one. And one of them actually is probably an English story originally, because I've heard versions of it, over in the West Country of England, which of course the people on that side of Notre Dame Bay where I grew up most of us can trace our ancestry back to Devon and Dorset, mostly some to Somerset, but mostly Devon and Dorset. But this is a story called Bill, Tom and the Fish, and it goes like this. William Thomas Windsor, better known as Bill Tom by everybody who had to live alongside of him, was born on a little island off the northeast coast of Newfoundland, right out around the mouth of Badger Bay. And like all young Newfoundlanders of his time, he was expected to work for his keep from the time he was big enough to do anything at all useful. I mean, that's the only reason people had youngsters in them days, was to do all the work. Once he learned to walk, he had to bring in a junk of wood every time he came into the house. When he was old enough to wield an axe, he was expected to clave it himself. And he especially had to make sure that the wood box was full of splits every evening, all ready to light the fire the next morning. And pretty soon he was the one getting up to light the fire in the morning, because his father would be away working. So he'd stick his head out from under the bedclothes and he'd blow out a little puff of air, just to get some idea of how cold it was them frosty winter mornings. Then he'd reluctantly drag himself out of his bunk and then break the sish in the piss pot on his way to the kitchen to put the fire in the stove. As a boy, he'd also be at the fish, catching tomcods off the wharf so his father could use them for bait in his lobster pots, or perhaps for feeding the dogs. He'd pick a few mussels for the table, be out on the beach them late August nights with a light to draw squids into the cove. And then when he was 13 or 14 years old, his father finally decided to take him on the fishing boat. Well, Bill Tom was some proud. He figured now his time had come. He was finally going to be recognized as a working man, a fisherman, like his father and grandfather before him. But while Bill Tom quite liked the idea that he was expected to work alongside of everybody else, he wasn't all that fussy about the actual work he had to do. And he certainly wasn't fussy about the bad weather they'd often encounter while fishing, or the rough seas they'd have to navigate. And when his father's boat run aground one time and got beat up on the rocks, Bill Tom allowed how it was a miracle that they all survived to tell the tale. But he vowed that he was done with fishing. Well, that was all very good. But since fishing was the only kind of work he ever done, and especially the only place he ever earned a few dollars, and since fishing was the only kind of work available there around Badger Bay at that time, he soon signed on to another fishing boat. And there he was saddled with a hard taskmaster of a skipper he didn't like, in a cranky old tub of a boat he didn't trust to stay afloat, and doing a job that he hated that much luck he figured he'd just as soon be pecked to death now by a flock of saltwater ducks. But he stuck with it because he had to. I mean, he had to earn a living for himself, and he had to help out the family too, because when their own boat got beat up on the rocks, his father never had the wherewithal to build another one. And Bill Tom was after getting married to a young woman he'd been courting for a few years, so he had to earn some money so they could build a life together. So after Bill Tom had been on this fishing boat now with the same hard-nosed skipper for the better part of 2 years, every day he'd stand on deck and lament the fact that he had to fish for a living because there was no other kind of work to be had. And as the boat would be making her way to the fishing grounds, sometimes in fog that thick you would lean on it. Bill Tom would be trying to come up with a scheme whereby he could give up fishing and stay ashore for good. Bill Tom didn't mind the water now. No, he just didn't like fish or anything to do with them. I mean, he didn't like picking them out of slubby nets. He didn't like the slimy way they felt in his hands. He didn't like the way their eyes bugged out of either side of their heads. He didn't like the way their mouths gasped for air anytime they were out of the water. He certainly didn't like the smell of them. He didn't even like the taste of them. Couldn't stand them. But his job was to cut the heads off and split them from the gills to the tail, haul out the slimy bits in the middle, and chuck it overboard to the gulls. And one day he was standing on deck with his splitting knife, heading and gutting codfish, feeling sorry for himself, and wishing he could give it all up and stay ashore. It was a beautiful day on the water, too. One of these rare days with not much wind, a pretty good cam on. The sun was glistening off the surface of the water, made it look right oily. When a nice-sized codfish that just come in on the trawl fell off the splitting table onto the deck before Bill Tom got a chance to split it. It's a wonder he seen it at all. He was a bit distracted with his daydreaming, and where the visibility was so good on this large day, well, he was casting an eye in all directions to see what other boats were on the go. But once his eye caught the sun sparkle off this codfish flopping around on the deck, And Bill Tom was reminded of everything he hated about fish and fishing. And when he picked it up in his hand to put it back on the splitting table, he could feel it quiver in his hand. And he couldn't say for sure what happened or why it happened when it did, but suddenly he decided that was it. He was done with fishing. He wasn't going to cut the head off another miserable codfish, wasn't going to haul the guts out of another solitary animal. So he picked the fish up in his hand, and with whatever strength he had in him, he fired it back over the side of the boat. Now the skipper had eyes like a hawk, and he was watching from the wheelhouse. When he seen Bill Tom throw a nice big fat codfish back in the water, he damn near had a conniption. He come flying through the wheelhouse door. Here, I'm not paying you to catch fish so you can chuck them back in the water, you lazy good for nothing. Too damn lazy to crawl up under the house, you are. You're done on this boat, my son. And if I see you chuck another fish in the water, you'll be walking back to shore. Well, Bill Tom didn't mind that, because he had already decided that he was going to quit fishing. So just to torment the skipper, he walked up before the mast, and he did the one thing you should never do on a boat. He started to whistle. Because when you're whistling on a boat, you're either whistling up the wind or you're whistling up the devil. And neither one of it is very good when you're on the water. I've sailed with people, with fellers who would chuck you overboard if they heard you whistle aboard the boat. That's how hard he takes it. But when Bill Tom come ashore this morning, the harsh reality is the fact that he just got the flick off the fishing boat hit him. And he realized there were going to be consequences that he never even thought about when he was daydreaming about giving it all up. For one thing, he was going to have to go home, and perhaps the hardest thing, he was going to have to go home and tell his wife that he got booted off the boat. So his mood, which had been quite jolly and carefree on his way back to shore when he reveled in the fact that this was his last fishing trip, became quite downcast and morose. And the despair that overtook him caused the corners of his mouth to turn down, and his eyes to get a little bit watery, and his mind to become quite distracted with what he was going to tell his wife when he got home, what her reaction would be, and how was he going to make a living now that he never had a job fishing anymore. And he was so distracted that he never noticed when a stranger caught up to him and started to walk alongside of him. And he never even noticed that this stranger was leading a cow, a big old black and white cow. And if Bill Tom's eyes hadn't been filled with tears, he might have noticed that there were two little horns sticking out of the stranger's head from under his cap, and a tail sticking out from under his coat. 'Twas old Nick, the devil himself. So the stranger took a notice of Bill Tom's distress as they walked along, and by and by the once he piped up and he said, "Who pissed in your porridge this morning, Bill Tom?" He said, "What are you looking so crooked for?" Bill Tom stopped and he looked the stranger up and down. He said, "Well, boy," he said, "I'm after losing me job," he said, "with no prospects of another one. And now," he said, "I got to go home and tell my wife I'm out of work." The stranger said, "Well, now, Bill Tom, boy," he said, that's a hard spot to be in." That is, he said, "What are you going to do?" Bill Tom said, "I don't know, boy, look for another job, I suppose. Although I don't know where I'm going to find one." And the stranger said, "No, boy," he said, "and neither do I." He said, "You won't find another job around here, that's for sure." Bill Tom didn't like this now, see, coming from a stranger. Got kind of sharpish with him, you know. "Go on," he said, "mind your own business." He said, "Get out of my sight. I'll take you something." And the stranger said, "Well, now, Bill Tom, boy," he said, "perhaps you will," he said, "and perhaps you won't. But," he said, "I'll tell you one thing," he said, "you wouldn't be out of work now if you had this cow, would you?" Bill said, "What are you talking about? What cow?" Bill Tom still never noticed the cow. The stranger said, "Bill Tom," he said, "this cow," he said, "gives the finest, the richest, the creamiest milk," he said, "in all of Newfoundland. With it," he said, "you can churn the finest butter to be found anywhere," he said. "And when she's finished providing you with milk and butter," he said, "she'll be the tastiest piece of meat you ever put on your table." Now, she probably would have made the finest kind of yogurt, too. But there was no yogurt in Newfoundland in them days. Yogurt never come to Newfoundland until 1974. But that's another story. So Bill Tom took all this in, and by the once he said, "Well," he said, "now that's all very well," he said, "but," he said, "I haven't got the cow," he said, "have I?" He said, "You're the one with the cow." And the stranger said, I'll make a deal with you now, Bill Tom." He said, "I'll tell you what I do for you now, Bill Tom," he said, "just to help you out of a pickle," he said. "You can have this cow," he said, "for 3 years. And when the 3 years are up," he said, "I'll come back," he said, "and I'll collect the cow. And he said, I'll ask you 3 questions. And he said, if you can't answer them, he said, I'll toss you over my shoulder and take you down into the fiery pits of hell. Well, I mean, when you're 20 years old, you know, 3 years seems like a long time. And Bill Tom thought to himself, sure, 3 years, the 3 years is a lifetime to that man. He's an old man now. He probably had that cow all forgot about in 3 years' time. and furthermore, Bill Tom thought to himself, because when you're 20 years old, I mean, you think you're going to live forever. But furthermore, Bill Tom thought to himself, he says, but I'm a smart young fellow, sure, no flies on me. Even if he do come back, I'd probably be able to answer his questions anyway. So Bill Tom shook hands with the devil, and the bargain was struck. The stranger handed over the reins of the cow to Bill Tom, and Bill Tom could scarcely believe his good fortune. Now he had something to distract his wife from the sad fact that he was after losing his job. So he marched on down the road, leading the cow behind him, and when he got to the lane that turned up towards their house, he happened to glance back over his shoulder. And he was a bit perplexed when he seen a puff of smoke and a flash of light, and the stranger disappeared doing a somersault over Jack Burton's fence. But he put it out of his mind, and he thought instead about what he was going to tell his wife when he got home. Now, when Bill Tom got up towards his house, his wife happened to be looking through the kitchen window. And when she seen Bill Tom coming up the lane with a cow in tow, well, she didn't quite know what to make of it. I mean, Bill Tom was after bringing home fish before, because they had to eat it, even if they didn't like it. He was after bringing home some of the lads he worked with on the boat before. But he'd never before brought home a cow. So she sung out to him. Bill Tom, she said, Bill Tom, what are you doing with that cow? Bill Tom said, my darling wife, he said, this cow, he said, gives the finest, the richest, the creamiest milk in all of Newfoundland, he said. With it, he said, we can churn our own butter. And he said, we'll open a little shop down by the water, he said, because I'm done with fishing. I'm ashore for good. Now, most of the time the devil tells lies. But this time, for once in his life, he was telling the truth. And that cow did indeed give the finest, the richest, the creamiest milk in all of Newfoundland. Bill Tom and his wife opened their little shop down by the water, and they became quite famous for their milk and butter, and their fish and chips, and their Jig's dinner, and their toutons, and their duffs, and their partridge berry pies. People came in their boats from miles around, from over around Leading Tickles and all the way around to Point Leamington on one side, and over from Luscious Bight and Nippers Harbour on the other. One crowd even came around Cape John from Lassie. But the clock was ticking. And one day, Bill Tom and his wife were getting ready to close up the shop. In fact, it was exactly 3 years to the day since Bill Tom had acquired the cow from the devil. And Bill Tom was mopping the floors. There was nobody left in the place, only a stranger sitting all by himself over in the corner. And once Bill Tom straightened up to lean on his mop, and suddenly, before his very eyes, there was a puff of smoke, a flash of light, and there was old Nick the devil himself in fine trim, all decked out in a cape and a brand new suit of clothes for the occasion. He even had a shine on his horns and hooves. So the devil said, now then, Bill Tom, he said, we meet again. He said, we made a bargain, he said. Your 3 years with the cow are up. I've come to take her back, he said, and to ask you 3 questions. Are you ready to answer the questions? Because if you don't answer them, he said, I'm going to toss you over my shoulder and take you down into the fiery pits of hell. And with that, the stranger in the corner piped up. Yes, he said. Oh, yes. He's ready to answer the questions, he said. And that was one of them. Well, the devil was kind of took aback now with this stranger butting into his business. So he turned to Bill Tom and he said, where did he come from? None of your beeswax, said Bill Tom, and that was your second question. Well, the devil got right dirty now with this unexpected turn of events, so he reared himself up on his hind legs and he flapped his arms in the air and he roared at the top of his eyes, what's he doing here anyway? And with that, the stranger in the corner got up and came over. He said, I'm the king of the codfish, he said. 3 years ago today, he said, that man there, he said, could have cut my throat and hauled the guts out of me, he said. But instead, he chucked me back in the water and saved me life. I'm here today, said to repay him. And that was your third question. Well, the devil got in such a temper, my son. He bawled and he blared, he cursed and he swore. He stamped his foot on the floor that hard that he left the print of his hoof in the floorboard. And he took off in such a scravel that he forgot to take his cow. Now, Bill Tom and his wife ran that little shop for a long time. And they did very well with it. Not a day went by that Bill Tom didn't thank his lucky stars that he threw the codfish back in the water and ended up with the cow. People came from the boatload to their little shop, and the whole community turned into a prosperous fishing village. Now, Bill Tom and his wife are long gone now, of course, but the little shop is still there, right out there alongside of that big marina they built there in Badger Bay. And if you happen to be out that way sometime and you tie your boat onto the wharf and go in for a cup of tea and a bun, you will still see the devil's footprint in the floorboard. Now, Bill Tom always maintained that he had his encounter with the devil because he whistled aboard of the boat. But like he asked everybody he told the story to, like he said it worked out all right for him, but would you be willing to chance it? So that's the story of Bill Tom and the fish. And so now I'm going to go back over and ask Mary if she's...
Okay, well, that kind of reminds me of a little story I'm going to tell.
Perfect.
Not quite as extravagant as that, but it's a great story. And it's a Jack story as well. And it goes like this. Once, not in my time or in your time, but in olden times and farmers' times, when houses were papered with pancakes, birds built their nests in old men's beards, and pigs ran around with forks and knives sticking out of their arses, singing bacon for sale, bacon for sale. There was a couple and they had a baby, a bouncing baby boy, and they named him Jack. And Jack grew up to be a man, and he went off and he started raising sheep. And he had a beautiful farm, and every day he would take the sheep out, let the sheep go out on the land, and they'd graze out on the barrens, and then they'd come back in. Now one day, the fog was as thick as you could lean on it, as Jim said, and Jack got very worried about his sheep. So he went out onto the barrens, and he walked and he walked, and he found most of the sheep, but he was still missing one. And he was very worried about that sheep. So he looked around here and he looked around there, and at last he saw that the sheep had fallen into a bog hole. And Jack leaned over and he grabbed hold of the sheep's tail. And he pulled and he pulled, but he could not get that sheep out. And if any of you have ever stepped in a bog hole with your rubber boots, you know it's almost impossible to get that boot back. Well, that's what it was like for this sheep. But Jack was determined because this was one of his sheep and he loved his sheep. So he pulled and he pulled and he pulled, but still that sheep would not come out. So Jack took off his raincoat and took off his sweater and he spit on his hands and he rubbed his hands together and he pulled and he pulled and he pulled that tail right off the poor little sheep. And if the tail had been stronger, this story would be longer. And that's the story. I'll leave it to you.
I did not see that coming.
No.
Will you go get here?
Yes, certainly will. What shall I do? Everybody, of course, has a great relationship with their mothers-in-law, now don't they? Maybe not. Okay. I do. I certainly do. I was sat down doing a bit of writing one time at the house, and she came in and she said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Oh, just writing a little recitation, that's all." She said, "When are you going to write one about me?" I said, "Be careful what you wish for, my dear." And she said, "Oh no, do it." She said, "I'd love to." So anyway, I wrote this, and she's fine with it. I'll announce that first, but it's the classic mother-in-law, son-in-law relationship, I guess. Like anyway, I call it son-in-law's lament. I was just leaving work on that cold winter's day when a call came in, and the wife, she did say, I slipped and fell on a hard patch of ice. There's a bruise on my leg, and it's not very nice. It might be broken, the wife said to me. Now, I'm no doctor, but I had to agree. So I went to emerge. Now, she's sporting a cast, and mine was racing, because I know that won't heal fast. The wife is so wonderful and looks after so much, but what could she do with that cast and a crutch? The thought crossed my mind, I fair started the ball. Yes, here enters the story, the mother-in-law. I could move in, she said with a smile, not for too long, just for a short while. I rolled my eyes because I knew by her voice the inevitable was coming, and I had no choice. Day one wasn't bad, it was all pretty new, and the kids were excited, and she even made stew. But oh my, what a taste you wouldn't feed to the cat. Yes, the wife cooks much better, that is a fact. Well, heading out with the boys about day number 4 to get a clean shirt, well, I opened the drawer. The red one, the white one, which one do you think? Well, shit on the laundry, so both options are pink. Then to turn on the TV, well, something was wrong. I searched everywhere, the remote was gone. Now, where did she put it? I know she's to blame. I searched everywhere, trying to hold in the rage. Well, what day is it now? It's not even a week. My nerves are shot, yes, I'm up to my peak. I'm ready to snap, and my senses I'll lose. If she don't leave soon, I might start on the booze. So I'm sitting at the pub, just having a few, since day 14, that's the thing that I do, when I heard a guy talking about his mother-in-law, saying how perfect she was without any flaws. He kept on going, and he was talking quite loud. She's an angel, he said, no one like her around. You're lucky, I said, she's not much like mine, because yours is an angel, and mine's still alive. Well, next night with the wife, I was laying in bed, when all of a sudden the thought entered my head. The trip to the barn, that's tomorrow. Oh no. She said, I can't walk, but Mom can go. Of course you can, I nodded and grinned, smiling on the outside, and inside I cringed. The kids will be excited, they wanted to go, but I dreaded the trip with that crooked old crow. Well, we got to the barn, and the parking was great, parked 3 miles away to ensure we were late, and my feet full of muck from that rainy, wet weather. Yes, I know it's winter, but it's Newfoundland, remember? But we seen the small horses, and we seen the emu, and we seen the baby goat and the mother goat too. We seen the donkey, who looked a bit cross. He was balking and kicking, his back legs he tossed. But the mother-in-law wasn't frightened at all. She said he must be hungry, that poor little doll. She walked over close with a handful of hay, but it wasn't a hunger, I don't think anyway. With 2 feet and a kick, as if right on cue, the hay went flying, and the mother-in-law too. It all turned out fine, even though it sounds bad. I was in the knots while the kids helped their nan. So we went to the office to report the situation. We showed off some bruises and a couple of abrasions. I have just one question, I asked the man there in charge. He said, you can't rent the donkey. She's booked up till March. So back home we went, an adventurous day with the mother-in-law shook up, but I guess she's okay. She said, I think I'll go home now. You don't need me. Yes, the wife is much better. I quickly agreed. Well, she's finally gone now after 43 days, and it wasn't too bad, I have to say. Yes, I do have a soft spot for the mother-in-law. It was out behind the house next to the garage. And yes, she do like it. She enjoys that presentation.
Oh my.
You got a rebuttal?
A rebuttal. I don't know.
But whatever you...
All right. I don't want to do a big long story at this point because we're probably anyway. So maybe I'll do another song if that's all right. But first, actually, just a little rhyme, because rhyming is a big part of storytelling, and it's where a lot of us start our storytelling as children. And I want to do a shout out to Mary and Laurie Fritz and Catherine Greer for the Mother Goose program, which I certainly took my own son to and was very instrumental in getting me telling stories, and I really enjoyed it. Anyway, this is this is a little one you can take home and remember and tell if you want. And thinking about, weather this time of year, because it sure doesn't look like spring for Rites of Spring out there. But anyway. Up the mountain, slippery as glass, down came the billy goat, riding on his overcoat. Okay, got that? You can take that one home with you. Let's say it together now. Up the mountain, slippery as glass, Down came the billy goat, riding on his overcoat. There you go. All right. I'm going to do a song. It's called "The Female Highwayman." Maybe a little bit of a revenge of the woman for the, yeah, anyway. And I learned this actually from a Martin Carthy record, which we had when I was growing up. It was his first record, and there's some great songs on there. But there is actually a version of it in the Peacock collection. It's called Gold Watch and Chain. But I know this version, so that's the one I'm gonna do. So-fe, all on a day, she dressed herself in man's array, with a sword and pistol all by her side, to meet her true love, away did ride. As she was riding over the plain, she met her true love, and made him stand. Your gold and silver, kind sir, she said, or else this moment, your life I'll have. And when she'd robbed him of his store, she said, kind sir, there is one thing more, a golden ring which I know you have. Deliver it, your sweet life to save. Oh, that golden ring a token is, my life I'll lose, the ring I'll save. Being tender-hearted just like a dove, she rode away from her true love. Next morning in the garden green, just like two lovers they were seen. He spied his watch hanging by her side, which made him blush like any bride. Oh, what makes you blush at so silly a thing? I thought to have had your golden ring. It was me that robbed you all on the plain. So here's your watch, and your gold again. Oh, I did intend, and it was to know if that you were me true love or no. And now I have a contented mind, my heart and all, my love is thine. There's actually another version of that where she says that if he had given her the ring, she would have shot him dead. And there's also a version where he says, you foolish thing, I could have killed you in the process of this whole
that's the local
interchange.
version.
Yeah.
But it's actually lyrically and melodically too, it's quite similar to the Newfoundland version, which is from St. Paul's, Everett Bennett and St. Paul's on out around Grossmorn. But that's what he winds up saying. He would have shot her if he had his guns with him. He would have shot her. So.
Cherry love story.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Well, it has a happy ending.
And a good, and a good defense of gun control as well. So, Mary, maybe we'll go back to you now for another.
Okay.
If you're up for it.
Okay. I think I'll tell Jack and his punt. I heard you tell that yesterday, and I thought to myself, Jim, yeah, that's a little bit different than the one that I tell. Yeah. So how about if I tell that? So once upon a time, not in my time or in your time, but in olden times and farmers' times, there was a woman, and she had 3 sons, Jack, Tom, and Bill. Now, they made their life fishing, and one year, Tom went down to the shore to look at the punt, which is a small fishing boat in Newfoundland. And he looked at the boat, and he said, this will not do. He said, it's got no way of fixing this boat this year. So he said to his mother, Mother, roast me a hen, bake me a bun. I'm going up the country to cut me some timbers to make a punt. And so that's what Mother did. She roasted him a hen, baked him a bun. He packed it all up, and he walked up the country, and he walked, and he walked, and he walked, until at last he came to a grand stand of trees. And he thought to himself, these will make me some good timbers to make a punt. But because he'd been walking all morning, he sat down, got a little fire going for himself, and Tom took out his cup of tea and got it all going. And who should come out of the woods but an old woman? And she looked at Tom and she said, "Now, Tom, would you share a bite of something with a poor old woman who's looking for a little bite to eat?" And Tom said, "Go away with you old hag. You're not getting anything I got here. I got work to do." She just turned and went back into the woods and said, "You'll get what you deserve," she said. And so Tom finished up eating his dinner and eating his tea, having his tea and everything, and then he picked up his axe and he went up to a great big tall tree. And with all his might, he swung. And as soon as the axe hit the tree, it just shattered. It was made of glass. And he went to the next tree and he picked up his axe. And with all his might, he swung and it hit the tree. And again, that one just shattered. Shards of glass went flying everywhere. And poor old Tom went from tree to tree to tree. And he realized he wasn't going to get any timbers this day. So we went home out of it. And when he got home, of course, Bill and Jack were there, and they were just making fun of him. And they said, "Sure, what's wrong with you? Don't be so foolish." And so Bill said to his mother, "Roast me a hen, bake me a bun, for tomorrow I'm going up the country." And so it was. Mother roasted him a hen, baked him a bun, and sent Bill on up the country. And he walked and he walked and he walked. And he came to a beautiful stand of trees up the country. And he was looking at the trees and he was thinking to himself, "Well, first I'm going to get myself something to eat." So he sat down, got a little fire going, got it all nice set up for himself, and started taking the food out, get ready to eat it. And who should come out of the woods but the old woman? And she said, "Bill, you wouldn't share a bite of something. Get away with you old hag," he said. She turned around and went back into the woods, and "You'll get what you deserve," she said. And Bill sat down and he ate his bit of dinner and he didn't mind any of that. And then when he was all done, he picked up his axe and he went up to the biggest, tallest tree he could find. And with all his might, he swung at this tree. And as soon as the axe hit the tree, ding, it was made of solid iron. Sparks were flying everywhere. "That's a queer old thing," said Bill. So he picked up the axe again, he went to the next one, hit it, bing. That was the way it was. He went from tree to tree. Poor old Bill couldn't get any old timbers for a punt. "Never mind," said Bill, so he went home out of it. And he told Tom and Jack what had happened. And of course they just started laughing at him. Now Jack, being the youngest, went to his mother and he said, "Mother, roast me a hen and bake me a bun, because I'm going up the country tomorrow." She said, "I'm not roasting any more hens and I'm not baking any more buns. Go away with you, Jack." And Jack went into the kitchen. Didn't mind that. He was used to that kind of behavior. So he went in. He just found a few old scraps of whatever he could find, an old tea bag. He threw it in a bag and he packed it over his shoulder and he went on up the country. And he walked and he walked and he walked all morning until he came to a grand stand of trees. Getting kind of hungry he was, so he got a little fire going, put the little pot on for a boil kettle, and then he got his little crust out and he put it on a little stick and he was toasting it over the fire. When out from the woods comes the old woman. She says, "Jack, would you spare a bite of something with me?" Jack said, "Well, I haven't got much, but you're welcome to this old crust of bread and an old tea bag with me, I suppose, if you'd like to join me." And so the two of them sat down and toasted their little bit of bread and drank their bit of old tea. And they had a grand conversation about this and that and the other thing. And after a while, the woman said to Jack, "Now, Jack, what are you doing out here today?" And Jack said, "Well, I'm here to cut a few timbers," he said, "so because I wants to make a punt for myself so I can go fishing." And she said, "Well, one good deed deserves another," she said. So she said, "You take your axe now," she said, "and you go up to that tree over there and you swing with all your might. And as soon as the axe hits the tree, I want you to lie down and close your eyes and you'll see." So Jack did as he was told. He took up the axe and he went over and he hit the tree. And as soon as the axe hit the tree, Jack fell down on the ground and closed his eyes. And when he opened up his eyes, there was the most beautiful punt that Jack had ever seen. But Jack got the face at him because, he was a bit crooked sometimes. And the woman said, "Now, Jack, what's wrong with you? That's the most beautiful punt." Jack said, "Yes, but," he said, "if you got a punt like this, she wants it to be the most beautiful colors in all the world." And she said, "No worries, Jack," she said. And she pulled from her skirts a paintbrush. And she said, now, Jack, you take this paintbrush and you said, close your eyes and run it this way over it and run it that way over the punt and imagine the colors you want it to be. When you open your eyes, you'll see. So Jack did as he was told. He brushed the paintbrush this way, brushed the paintbrush that way. And when he opened his eyes, the punt was the most beautiful colors that Jack could have imagined. And Jack climbed up in the punt. Then he got the face on him again. What's wrong with you now, Jack? She said, he said, there's no good having a punt in the middle of the woods. Up the country here, how am I going to get this down to the water? And she said, Jack, this is a special punt, she said. Now this punt, she said, all you got to do to tell it to fly and it'll take you wherever it wants to go. And then all you have to do is tell it to pitch and it'll come down wherever you want it to land. Oh, that's fine, sure, he said. So he hops up in the punt, this beautiful painted punt, and he gets in it and he says, fly. And just like that, the boat starts to shake and shudder. And before long, Jack's flying up in the sky. He sees the little old woman. He sees where he had his fire. And soon he's flying out over and he sees Tom and Bill down on the wharf and his mother's little house. And he thinks to himself, sure, I'm going off to seek my fortune with this boat and see what I can see. And so he sails out over, and before long, he reaches England. And he sees a castle. And he thinks to himself, well, this is a fine place to come down. So he says, pitch. And just like that, the boat comes down and lands in the courtyard of this castle. And of course, the king was watching out through the window and saw all of this going on. He came running out after Jack. Jack, he said, come in and have a cup of tea, he said, with me. Yes, said Jack. So Jack went in and he had a cup of tea with the king. And while he was there, didn't the princess who lived in this castle come in and see Jack too? And the two of them took one look at each other, and I can tell you they fell mad in love. And so they decided they should get married. Yes, said Jack, I'd love to marry you, he said, but can't marry you till I take you home to meet me mother. So we'll fly over to Newfoundland, and then we'll fly back, and we can have the big old wedding here in the castle. So they agreed. So the princess gets in with Jack. I think her name was Nancy too. She gets in with Jack and Nancy gets in the boat, and Jack says fly, and just like that the boat takes off and flies back to Newfoundland. And there's Tom and Bill down on the wharf. And Jack says pitch, and he comes right down beside the wharf. Well, you can imagine the face on Tom and Bill when they saw Jack with the beautiful princess, the boat of all them beautiful colors. They were as jealous as could be. Jack and the princess gets out, and they says, now, Jack, how'd you get that boat? And Jack told the story, and he says, all you got to do is get in it and tell it to fly. It'll take you wherever you wants to go. And Tom and Bill gets knocking Jack over and hops in the boat, says, fly. And just like that, the boat took off and floated right up into the sky. And Jack saw it floating, but he never did get to tell Tom and Bill about Peach. I'm sure they're still up there now, floating around for all they know. At night, if you lie down and look up at the sky, you'll see something moving slowly around like that. That's Tom and Bill. As for Jack, well, he got married to this beautiful princess, and he lived there with his mother, which was a lot easier after Tom and Bill was out the picture, I must say. And they all sat down to the tin table, but the tin table bended, so my stories ended. If the tin table had been stronger, well, my story would have been longer. And if they didn't live long and happy, then may all of you. Thank you.
All right, well, we've come up along to noon here, so I guess we'll wind her down here now. I'll just say that I mentioned the song session that'll take place here this afternoon in this room, hosted by Eleanor Dawson, with Paul Dean, Monica Walsh, and Mark Manning as guest singers. Also an open floor for audience members to sing as well, as I mentioned earlier. Tonight we have a concert over in Suncor Hall in the School of Music building over on the campus. And that will be co-hosted by myself and Eleanor. Anita Best, Joe Byrne, Ellen Power, and Aaron Collis are our special guests tonight. So, hopefully we'll see some of you over there as well. Good as a Concert, by the way, is kind of an undertaking that Eleanor and I really got going there, I guess just before COVID, really bad timing, as it turned out. But MMaP, whose space this is, the Research Center for the Study of Music, Media and Place, it's the ethnomusicology division of the School of Music, really. So they got involved with it as well, and it's been great. So I want to say thanks to Harry Berger down there, who's the chair, I think is your title, is it chair? Something like that, executive director. Annalise Smith over here in the corner. Who's helping out here today, and especially to Spencer Crew here, who was here early this morning setting up the room, and Spencer does sound for a lot of these events. We'd like to thank you very much for spending your Saturday morning with us, because we were going to be here anyway. And, it would have been a bit lonely if you hadn't turned out. I'd like to say a special thank you to Mary Farron over here, Harry Ingram, and Catherine Wright. And I remind you to watch out for events sponsored by the St. John's Storytelling. I'm just going to leave you with this short little piece here now to finish up. I was doing a gig in Fleur-de-Lis on the tip of the Bay Bird Peninsula one night, gosh, a long time ago now. But a fellow by the name of Cyril Drover came up from Harbour Round, and I was there for 2 nights, so he came up and he slept in his car so he could stay for the second night. But every time I took a break, he was regaling me with songs and stories and jokes and riddles, you name it. The man was just full of it, and delighted to share it, which is, you know, our bread and butter for all of us, as Harry alluded to earlier on. But it's called the Crooked Crab Tree. It's a bit of a tongue twister, and it goes like this. Here's to the crooked crab tree. Here's to the grass that grows around the crooked crab tree. Here's to the cow with the crooked horn that ate the crooked grass that grows around the crooked crab tree. And here's to the woman with the crooked arm that milked the crooked cow with the crooked horn that eat the crooked grass that grows around the crooked crab tree. Now here's to the man with the crooked leg who married the crooked woman with the crooked arm that milked the crooked cow with the crooked horn that eat the crooked grass that grows around the crooked crab tree. And here's to the minister with the crooked book who married the crooked man with the crooked leg to the crooked woman with the crooked arm that milked the crooked cow with the crooked horn that eat the crooked grass that grows around the crooked crab tree. And here's to the tailor with the crooked needle who sewed the crooked suit of clothes for the crooked minister with the crooked book who married the crooked man with the crooked leg to the crooked woman with the crooked arm that milked the crooked cow with the crooked horn that eat the crooked grass that grows around the crooked crab tree. Now here's to the rooster with the crooked crow who woke the crooked tailor with the crooked needle who sewed the crooked suit of clothes for the crooked minister with the crooked book who married the crooked man with the crooked leg to the crooked woman with the crooked arm with the crooked cow with the crooked horn eat the crooked grass that grows around the crooked crab tree. And here's to the dog with the crooked bar who woke the crooked rooster with the crooked crow, woke the crooked tailor with the crooked needle, sewed the crooked suit of clothes for the crooked minister with the crooked book who married the crooked man with the crooked leg to the crooked woman with the crooked arm with the crooked cow with the crooked horn eat the crooked grass that grows around the crooked crab tree. And here's to the rest of you. Have a great day.